Welcome to the WanderLearn show. I'm your host, Tapon. In this episode, I have Matt Halterman, who's the author of Beautiful Hungry Animals. It's a book about going vegan. Now, before you run away, I encourage you to listen to all 4 episodes of this series because he approaches the whole issue in a very unique and different way, and that's what makes it so compelling of an argument and a discussion, should I say. And don't forget also to go to patreon.com/ftapon to pick up some remarkable rewards. They're really fun rewards. My favorite one is just $2 a month. That's it. And you're going to get my book as I write it, and it's a great way to give feedback on the book. You're going to get advanced copies of the book. And then I have many other rewards. I have one that's for $25 a month. You get $300 worth of gifts at the end of the year. And these are real physical objects, whatever you want, basically almost anything you want on Amazon, more or less. These are some of the cool rewards. And at that same time, you're helping me go forward. So most people say, hey, give me $25 a month and then I'll just give you my smile. No, I'm actually sending $300 worth of products at the end of the year. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to the WanderLearn show. I'm your host, Tapon. I'm here with Matt Halterman, who is the author of a fantastic book called Hungry, Beautiful Animals. This is his 3rd time, and I wanted to dive into the practical aspects of going vegan. Now, again, a lot of people have sympathy for animals. Most people love dogs, pets, and they might have a goldfish bowl and that kind of stuff. But paradoxically, if you're an alien, you say like, wow, you have so much compassion for these animals, and yet you then slaughter them in the most brutal fashion. And so people intellectually deal with that. But culturally, practically, it just seems impossible. I'm like, God, forget it. How am I ever going to do this? So what kind of practical steps, Matt, can somebody who's like has a certain level of compassion for animals take to then take a tiny step toward going vegan? And what would you suggest them to do?
Yeah. So the first thing I'd say, Francis, and again, it will surprise no one that a philosopher would say this, but Socrates has this beautiful advice: know yourself, right? A beautiful life, a good life begins with assessing who you are. And so I think the first thing that people who are sort of veg curious ought to do is get as curious as they can about that inner work. So we talked on a previous episode about how all human beings are complicated inside, right? We've got our physical bodies, we've got our social relationships, we've got our emotional states, we've got our intellectual lives and our moral orientations and concerns. They're not always aligned. And so I think the first step for any life transformation, for any aspiration that you desire to make headway on, should be to get to know those parts of yourself as intimately as you can, to know what makes them tick, to know where the conflicts are going to lie, right? Because every single one of us has a different matrix of relationships inside. And one of the reasons that going vegan can feel so practically difficult to people is because it elicits all this inner conflict, right? So I'll give you some really down-to-earth examples so people can know exactly what I mean. So maybe intellectually you saw a documentary, right? You read a book, or maybe emotionally you've got this companion animal in your life who's really turned things. But maybe you've got a moral commitment or a religious commitment, like, God said animals are here for us to eat, or morally, human beings matter more. And so now you find yourself with this really weird inner conflict, right? So you've got your emotions saying, oh, gosh, we need to do better by these animals we're eating. And you've got your brain, your mind saying, well, God says it's okay. Or you've got your moral orientation saying, yeah, but, human problems are much more important. And so there's this inner tension.
Or my baby's health is important. I got to feed my child. That's
exactly
way more important than some stupid chicken.
Yes, 100%. And so living lives as we do, we talked in the previous episode about fragility and flow, right? But living in that space where there are these constant conflicts among the different parts of who we are, it's impossible to sustain longer term commitments to moving in the direction of those aspirations if we don't get those inner parts of ourselves in better alignment than we usually have them. That project can only get off the ground with personal introspection, right? You have to know yourself in order to know what your triggers are going to be. And I think anytime somebody is trying to do something new, right? Maybe somebody who's struggling with alcoholism, or maybe somebody who wants to become more physically fit, right? They've got to know, okay, these are the situations where I'm most likely to turn to alcohol. These are the situations where my emotions are going to tell me, take that drink, take that drink, take that drink. So if you really want to make headway, you got to do that inner work so that your head can say to your heart, you know what? This party would be a lot of fun, but this is a 90% relapse, right? If you go to this party, you are going to end up in a place that a lot of us, right, all these complex parts, we don't want to end up there. I think very, very much the same idea when it comes to starting with a new commitment to going vegan. If you don't know who you are, what you struggle with, what's going to be fun, what's going to be difficult, making practical choices will be the next thing to impossible, Francis, right? Because you don't know what's practical.
Right, but hold on. So let's say my weakness, let's say, might be I go to somebody's house and they're going to serve meat or whatever, fish or something like that. And it's rude not to eat what they've served you. That's an example. Yes. How would you deal with that? I know that that's my weakness. So another weakness of mine is when I travel internationally, I think you're an idiot if you go to Japan and you don't try sushi at least once. Sure. Just once. Or you go to Argentina and you don't try un asado, which is a piece of steak. Just once. Just to try it. Because part of travel is the cuisine of every place. And so you're kind of you're missing out on an important component of travel by giving up on that. And so those are two examples of where I struggle to be vegan, right?
Well,
so what would you say?
On my view of going vegan, that is not necessarily a barrier, right? Any more than not giving sacrificially is a barrier to being a Christian, or getting angry sometimes is a barrier to being a Buddhist, right? I mean, we all are on a journey, right? And so I think, making wise decisions. Okay, so let's say you're going to Argentina. You've never had this particular type of steak before. You believe that it's really important, for whatever reason, aesthetic reasons, moral reasons, whatever your reasons are, that it's important to have this experience. But you also believe it's important to be on this journey of going vegan. Well, I can imagine saying in advance, rather than getting in my undies in a twist, right? Having all this shame, all this blame, all this tension, turning my back on going vegan the other 95% of the time or whatever, I would say, okay, well, this is one of those occasions where I am going to let that daring part of me, that part of me that requires for its flow, trying new things, even when I have moral quibbles about them. I'm going to let that part of who I am be in the driver's seat in this particular experience. But I'm also going to acknowledge that letting that part be in the driver's seat is going to probably create some friction with the other parts, right? Maybe my intellectual self is going to be saying, gosh, I need to do better. This isn't consistent. Or maybe my emotional self is going to be saying, you incoherent fool, right? You hug your dog and you eat, right, the steak. Plan for that, right? Recognize that sometimes we're negotiating among these different parts of who we are, and that inner harmony requires making decisions that are optimal for one part and suboptimal for other parts. And that part of a flourishing life is to know when you're going to make those, right, compromises. Another strategy that I often use when I know I'm going to make a compromise is to try to offset or do something that I think is beautiful, right, on the other side of that equation. So I might donate, right, the amount that I paid to that restaurant for that experience to a sanctuary, right? So that's a negotiation, right? That's saying, look, I'm allowing this daring part to kind of take me away from the moral tug that usually wins the day. But in return for that allowance, my moral part is going to pay that same amount, right, to this other place. Now, to the Western mind, that sometimes feels like, right, Well, that's totally incoherent. But I subscribe to a more plural minded way of thinking about our inner lives. And to me, this is something we do all the time with our families, with our friends, right? We are constantly making choices that are optimal for the situation we're in, even though they're suboptimal, right? From a variety of other perspectives.
Yeah. Does this dress make me look fat, honey? Right? And you're like, you say I'm not a liar. I don't say lies. But all of a sudden, in certain situations, that moral of I never lie goes out the door. And
Right.
we do this cognitive dissonance, like, oh, okay, this is different. Or like, I'm going to go to the office. I'm going to steal a few pens from the office. And you're not a thief. But wait, you just stole a pen from the office. So we have
Yeah.
all this cognitive dissonance, and eating is just, especially if you're trying to aspire to going vegan, you're going to face similar kind of challenges, is what you're saying.
That exactly. And I think this discernment process and being prepared for it in advance insulates you from the despair of not being perfect, right? Because in my experience, it's so tempting. Your imagination is captured. You want to go vegan. This is so exciting. And then you walk into the office holiday party, or then you walk into this restaurant and the smell of that food you've loved since you were 5, right, fills the room. Or then you have this very promising dating opportunity, but the person is an omnivore, or right. I mean, this is the thing about being human is perfectionism is ruled out before we even start because of that middling character, right? That we talked about on a previous episode. And so when we talk about the things that most people think of as practical, right? In a way, I'm cheating here, Francis, because you said, well, talk to me about the practical stuff. And what most people expect when you ask them to talk about the practical stuff is, well, start with learning one new recipe, or find a pair of vegan pants that really fits well and start to integrate those into your wardrobe, or right, choose a meal that you have with your friends where everyone goes out to the restaurant and chooses plant-based, right? Those are the things most of us think of as the practical brass tacks things. But in order to be wise and discerning about those practical choices, the most practical thing you can do if you want sustainable practices is to know yourself intimately so that you can anticipate where these points of tension are going to be, allow them, right? Forgive yourself and move on, right? I mean, I don't give up the desire to be a good parent when I mess up as a parent. Usually when I mess up as a parent, it provides a learning opportunity. It provides a growth opportunity. At least if I've done my homework and I'm able to see why, right, I became really angry in that context, or I had a failure of empathy, right, in that context. So my view is you're going to do much better at discerning which practical baby steps are the right ones for you if you know that inner landscape. Because then you can say things like, you know what? When I go to parties, I really love the feeling of being the one person there who's a vegan. So I'm always going to choose to be vegan at parties because it floats my boat to show others that this is possible. For other people, that's a nightmare, right? Nothing could be worse than having to be loud and proud in a social situation about these commitments. So 2 different people who are going vegan might have a diametrically opposed approach to going vegan at a party, right? The person who takes pride in being, right, stoking moral imagination can go to the party and be the winsome advocate who shows others that it's possible. The person who shrinks from that kind of situation and it's an introvert's nightmare says, you know what? I'm going to bring a really delicious vegan casserole, but I'm not even going to mention that it's vegan. I might even try some of the other things that are there in order to avoid awkward conversations. This is how I go vegan in this particular space. On the view of going vegan that I articulate, those opposite approaches to the same situation make perfect sense. because the inner landscapes of the people taking the actions are very, very different. And their inner knowledge and understanding of who they are and what that existential life on the ground is like, wisdom demands different choices in those cases.
Very well said. And it's a very complex subject. In the end, it's a lot about philosophy, right? In our final, let's take a break and then come back for our final episode where we're going to talk about the health issues around veganism. And that ends this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel, technology, and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we've talked about, go to wanderlearn.com and click on this episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is always my social media username. My website is ftapon.com. Do you want to leave me an anonymous voicemail where you can make a comment or ask a question? Then go to speakpipe.com/ftapon. Furthermore, if you'd like to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ftapon. That's where you can pick up some remarkable rewards for as little as $2 a month. Now, 5 quick favors. Number 1, subscribe to the WanderLearn podcast. 2, download it. 3, share it. 4, review it. And 5, sign up for my newsletter at wanderlearn.com. Our theme music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.